When Brian heard his wife say, "He's lucky to have me," not in private, but at a brunch full of friends, he laughed along. But inside something snapped. What followed wasn't a fight. It was a silent war. One she never even saw coming. Brian always thought marriages didn't collapse overnight. They eroded slowly, like water wearing down stone. You don't notice until you're standing in the rubble, wondering when it all started. For Brian, it began with laughter. Not his, Danielle's. She laughed louder at other people's jokes, especially when he was in the room. Then came the corrections. Harmless at first. Actually, that's not quite how it happened. But they chipped at him, not because he minded being wrong, but because of how she delivered it. Loudly, smirking, like he was a kid who'd spoken out of turn. At dinner with friends, she'd talk over him. One time, he brought up a new show he liked. Before he could finish, she interrupted, "Oh no, it's not like that. He always misses the point." Everyone laughed. Brian smiled, but inside, something recoiled. Still, he brushed it off. Long-term couples tease each other, right? Then came the brunch. It was a rooftop spot, trendy, loud, full of bottomless mimosas and fake smiles. Brian didn't want to go, but Danielle insisted. "It'll be good for your social battery," she said with that familiar mix of charm and condescension. They sat with 10 others at a long table, the kind where people talk over plates more than with each other. Halfway through, someone raised a glass. "To all the couples here, our other halves." That's when Danielle leaned in with a smirk. "Well, in our marriage," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm the real reward." He just tagged along for the perks. The laughter was instant, familiar. Some nodded. One friend clinked glasses with her like it was the truest thing he'd ever heard. Brian didn't react. Not visibly. He chuckled, nodded. But inside, something stopped. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was silence. A kind of quiet detachment that signals the beginning of the end. Even if no one knows it yet. That line stayed with him. "I'm the real reward." She didn't say it to be funny. She believed it. And worse, she thought everyone else did too. Brian didn't bring it up on the drive home. Didn't mention it that night. He just let her talk about how great the brunch was while he nodded and smiled. The next morning, he brought her tea in bed like always. She didn't say thank you. She hadn't in years. Later that week, as they got ready for bed, she said something that hit even deeper. "You know what your problem is, babe? You're too easy to keep. No chase. No mystery." She said it without looking at him, face buried in her phone, as if she were narrating to an audience and he was just the background noise. That night, he didn't sleep much. He thought about who he used to be, before all the compromises, before he learned to keep the peace by keeping quiet. He wasn't bitter, just tired. Tired of being the dependable one who never got noticed unless it was to be corrected or joked about. And that's when the shift began. Quiet like her insults, subtle like the erosion she never noticed. The next morning, he left early. Didn't wait for the usual routine. No half-hearted goodbye. No kiss on the cheek. Just noted. And the sound of the front door closing behind him. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a move. It was the first moment he chose himself. And she didn't notice. She was too busy curating another Instagram post. Too sure of her grip on him. Too confident in her role as the prize. That's the thing about people like Danielle. They don't see the cracks forming until the floor gives way. They don't hear the silence growing louder until it echoes. And Brian, he had just stopped laughing. The first thing Brian did was dig out his old running shoes. They were tucked behind rows of Danielle's designer heels, like a forgotten version of himself. He hadn't run in years. Not since they got married. Not since her needs slowly filled every corner of his time. He started with 2 miles, then 4. By the end of the week, he was clocking 6 before breakfast. Danielle barely noticed. She was on another one of her spiritual alignment kicks, scrolling endlessly through influencers who preached self-love while selling overpriced crystals. One evening, she looked up from her phone. "Ha! You've lost weight," she said, as if observing a houseplant that had suddenly bloomed. Brian didn't respond. He just walked past her. No tea that night. A few days later, he shaved off his beard. Danielle always said it made him look distinguished. Code for softer, older, less threatening. Without it, he looked younger, sharper, like the man he used to be. She blinked when she saw him. Did something happen at work? No, he said. Just wanted to see myself again. That one landed. He saw it in the way she paused, just for a second, before pretending not to care. Over the next few weeks, he started pulling back. No fights, no accusations, just less. He stopped asking if she wanted anything when he went out. Cooked for himself. If she came home late, he didn't ask where she'd been. If she invited him to watch a show, he said he had other plans, and meant it. For the first time in years, Brian was no longer available by default. Danielle didn't react immediately. She was too used to his silence meaning submission. But slowly, something began to shift in her too. She started watching him, not lovingly but cautiously. Like she couldn't quite place what was different, only that something was. At the gym, a woman he'd seen around commented on his playlist when she overheard him humming. At the corner store, the cashier smiled and told him he smelled sharp. He hadn't changed his cologne. Danielle had just stopped noticing. And that's when it hit him. It wasn't that he had faded. She had stopped looking. One night, they were getting ready for a charity event she insisted on attending. Brian dressed in silence. When he stepped out, fully ready, Danielle, still in front of the mirror, called out, "Wear the jacket with the blue lining. It brings out your eyes. Don't make me look like I'm babysitting tonight." He stared at her reflection. She wasn't even facing him. "You're mistaken," he said calmly. She turned. "What?" "I'm not here to accessorize you." No sarcasm, no anger, just a quiet statement. And for once, she had no response. He chose a different jacket and left without another word. That night, at the event, she clung to him more tightly than usual. Introduced him to colleagues with a tone that was almost performative. She kept looking at him like he was a puzzle that no longer fit the box. In the car ride home, she finally said, "You're different lately, more confident." Brian didn't look at her. "Maybe I remembered who I was before you convinced me I wasn't enough." Danielle turned toward the window. He knew she wasn't watching the road. She was trying to glimpse what was slipping through her fingers. For years, she'd seen herself as the prize. But now, the man beside her wasn't playing the same game. And the worst part? She still thought she was winning. Danielle never asked where Brian was going. Not for months. She was too sure he'd always return. So when he came downstairs on a Saturday night wearing fitted jeans and his favorite cologne, the one she once said made him smell like temptation, she barely looked up from her tablet. "Where are you headed?" she asked, casual but sharp around the edges. "Out," he replied, grabbing his keys. "With who?" "Friends." "You didn't mention anything. I didn't think you'd care." And with that, he was gone. There were no friends. No date. Brian drove to a quiet cafe, ordered black coffee, and read for 2 hours. What mattered wasn't the destination. It was the act of leaving without permission. For once, Danielle wasn't in the loop. And that shook her. When he got home, she was still on the couch. The TV was on, but she wasn't watching it. She looked up, searching his face for clues. He said nothing. Over the following days, her tone changed. Softer. Tentative. She asked if he wanted to watch a movie, suggested ordering from his favorite place. At the grocery store, she reached for his hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't close his fingers either. That half-hold said more than silence. Then came the night she tried to break the spell. She stood in the doorway of their bedroom wearing a silk robe, one he hadn't seen in months. "I've been thinking," she said, stepping toward him. "Maybe we've been distant." He said nothing. She sat beside him, placed a hand gently on his thigh. "I miss this," she whispered. "This?" he asked, looking at her hand. "You." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years he felt nothing. Not hurt, not anger, just done. He stood, walked to the bathroom, and shut the door quietly. Danielle didn't try again that night. The next morning, She asked. Are you seeing someone? Brian raised an eyebrow. Why? You're different. Distant. I'm just not used to seeing me through your eyes anymore, he said. So I stopped trying. That week, she checked his phone. Not discreetly. She wanted to find something. A reason. A threat. But there was nothing. Just a man who had stopped chasing a woman who didn't value him. That, to her, was more threatening than any affair. One evening, she stormed into his office, voice trembling with panic poorly disguised as anger. So that's it? She asked. You're just done. Brian looked up from his book. I'm not done. I'm just done fighting for someone who treats me like a lucky win instead of a choice. Her jaw tightened. You used to say I was the best thing that ever happened to you. You were, he said, until I remembered I existed before you, and I liked who I was. She didn't cry then, but she stood frozen, as if realizing she'd walked straight into her own worst fear, and that it was real. She had built her identity around being the one chased. Now she was the one chasing and he was out of reach. There were no more attempts at intimacy after that. No more robe, no more guilt. Just awkward dinners and cautious glances. She started cooking again. Dishes he once loved. Meals they used to laugh over. But the table was quiet. Her smile no longer worked like it used to. The final shift came at her company's cocktail party. She had begged him to attend. And for once he said yes. He dressed well, arrived on time, polite, confident. She noticed. So did everyone else. She played the proud wife, smiling, praising, introducing him like a trophy husband. But then, as always, she went too far. 3 glasses of wine in, surrounded by a younger group of colleagues. She said it again. Oh, Brian? He's a saint. Honestly, if I told him I wanted to move to Peru to be a llama whisperer, he'd just pack the bags and say, how many llamas? Laughter. Nervous. Hollow. She grinned, eyes scanning for validation. I always say I'm the real reward in this marriage. He just got lucky. This time, Brian didn't smile. He looked around the group, then back at her. Funny, he said. I used to believe that too. Silence. Sharp. Heavy. He let it sit for a beat. But lately, he continued, I've been thinking maybe she got lucky too. Then he turned to a younger woman in the group, someone Danielle had ignored, and asked about a project she'd worked on. The conversation shifted. Instantly, Danielle stood beside him, smiling, but disconnected. A guest at her own show. That night, in the car, she didn't speak. Arms crossed, eyes out the window. At home, she followed him into the kitchen. Did you have to embarrass me like that? He turned slowly. I didn't embarrass you. You finally heard how you sound when you talk about me. Her mouth opened, then closed. He poured a glass of water, drank it, and walked away. That night, he didn't sleep in their bed. Not out of anger, out of peace. And that, more than anything, made her realize she wasn't in control anymore. For the first time since they met, Brian was gone, and he hadn't even left. Danielle didn't speak to Brian for 2 days after the party. Not in anger, but in confusion. She kept expecting him to come to her. That's how their cycles always worked. She'd push too far, he'd withdraw, and eventually he'd cave. Apologize for making her feel bad about something she said. Not this time. She found him Saturday morning in the garage, organizing the workbench he hadn't touched in over a year. He looked calm, focused, like he was putting himself back together, one drawer at a time. You're slipping away, she said from the doorway. He didn't stop what he was doing. Am I? Her voice faltered. I don't know what's happening to us. He finally turned to face her. You said you were the reward in this marriage, he said evenly. You were wrong. We both were. She stood there, stunned. Tears welled, but he didn't move to comfort her. That used to mean something to him. Now, it just meant she'd finally realized he wasn't going to chase her anymore. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. But you did, he replied. She hesitated. Then, can we fix this? He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, really looked, saw the cracks under the surface. The doubt, the fear, the regret, all the emotions she used to make him feel. "I'm not angry anymore," he said, her face lit with brief hope. "I'm just not interested in going backward." That hope vanished. She cried. Not loudly. No drama. Just quiet, contained tears. The kind you shed when you realize you miscalculated the ending. Brian walked past her, placed a wrench on the counter, and went inside. That night they slept under the same roof. But not in the same place. And they never truly did again. The days that followed were silent in a different way. Not cold, just disconnected. She made dinner 3 nights in a row. Tried to mimic the rhythm of a life that used to exist. But the meals were flat. Like peace offerings with no understanding of what the war had even been about. She asked more questions. About his day, his schedule, his plans. As if gathering information could rebuild connection. He answered politely, but never fully. Once, while walking through a parking lot, she reached for his hand again. He let her, for a few seconds, then gently let go. That loose grip haunted her more than a fight ever could. Danielle tried another tactic. Nostalgia. She brought out photo albums, played old playlists, even suggested they visit a bed and breakfast they used to love. Brian declined. He wasn't cruel, just distant, honest. He wasn't going back to what they had. He was moving on without physically leaving. Then came the conversation she thought she'd never have to start. It was a Thursday evening. Brian was reading in his office when she walked in, eyes raw. "I keep thinking about that night," she said. "At the party." He didn't look up. "You humiliated me." "I told the truth," he said. "You just didn't expect it to be public." She walked closer. "Do you still love me?" He closed the book, looked her in the eye. "I loved you for years, Danielle. Even when it hurt. Even when you stopped trying. I waited for you to see me. Not the role you built, not the version you corrected, but me." A beat passed. "I don't think you ever did." She swallowed hard. "I thought, if I didn't chase you, you'd stay." "You thought love meant being the prize," he said. "But love isn't about being admired. It's about choosing each other. Daily. Equally." Danielle didn't argue. She couldn't. Because for the first time, she realized she had stopped choosing him a long time ago. Now she wanted him again. But not because she saw him. Because he was leaving. They stayed in the same house, but it was no longer a shared space. Just a transition zone. She hoped he'd soften. That one night he'd reach for her again. That a moment would reopen the past. But Brian never reached. He didn't bring up divorce. Didn't make a scene. He was too calm for that. But the exit was happening, step by quiet step. The scariest part for Danielle wasn't the silence. It was realizing he didn't need to raise his voice to leave her behind. Brian didn't leave dramatically. No suitcase at the door. No late-night confrontation. One morning, he simply told Danielle he'd signed a short-term lease across town. That he needed space. She stood frozen, as if waiting for him to take it back. "You're moving out?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Just like that." "No, not just like that. This started a long time ago." She didn't argue. She knew she couldn't. Not when every moment of the past few months had pointed to this outcome. In the following days, she tried again. More meals. More softness. Once, she even curled up next to him on the couch and rested her head on his shoulder. He didn't move away, but he didn't lean in either. There was no warmth left to offer her. On the day he packed up a few essentials, she hovered near the door. "Are you really walking away from everything we built?" Brian zipped the bag and looked at her calmly. "I'm walking away from the version of me you stopped respecting." Tears formed, but she didn't beg. Maybe pride kept her quiet. Or maybe it was shock. Realizing that the man she once thought couldn't live without her, now didn't ask for anything. "I never meant to lose you," she whispered. "You didn't lose me," he said. "You just never thought I'd find myself." And with that, he left. The weeks that followed were still, quiet. Danielle didn't tell her friends. Not yet. She didn't want to answer the questions. Didn't want to admit that she had driven away someone who gave her everything. Meanwhile, Brian adjusted quickly. He focused on work, joined a weekend hiking group, started playing guitar again. He didn't chase anyone, didn't rebound. He just lived, fully, quietly, with clarity. And Danielle unraveled slowly. She sent a few texts, friendly, familiar. He responded, always politely, but never inviting more. Once she asked if he'd consider therapy. He said he already had, by himself. That he didn't need to fix a marriage where he'd already buried the version of himself who begged to be seen. Eventually, she stopped reaching out. Somewhere in the silence, she began to understand. Not just that she had pushed him away, but that she never truly believed he would leave. She thought she was the one in control. That being chosen was a right, not a responsibility. But love doesn't work like that. Respect doesn't either. One day, months later, they crossed paths in a grocery store. Danielle smiled, caught off guard. He nodded. Kind, distant. "You look good," she said. "Thanks," he replied. "I feel good." They talked briefly. Small talk. She asked if he was seeing anyone. He said no, just enjoying his life. Then he asked how she was doing. "I'm working on myself," she said. He smiled politely. "Good." As he turned to leave, she reached out impulsively. "Brian, wait." He stopped, looked at her. "I just want to say, I get it now." He nodded once. "I hope you do." And he walked away. That was the last time they spoke. Danielle never remarried. She dated, doubted, wondered. Brian never badmouthed her. Never posted long rants or sought pity. He just rebuilt. Not to prove her wrong. To prove to himself that he never needed to stay invisible to keep someone else shining.